welcome to Marianne Crawford from Singleton Council. Marianne is an environmental scientist, and so welcome, Marianne, and we're really interested to hear your story.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Cool. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your current role, and then we might kind of work backwards from there. So what do you do? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so my current role is called the Manager of Development and Environmental Services. It's a bit of a mouthful. I look after, at council, I look after a range of different services. So I look after planning, so that's land use planning, so how land is used into the future. I also look after the assessment of development. So if you want to build a house and you need the approval to do that, my team does that approval process for you. And I also look after compliance in that space as well, making sure people are doing what they said they were going to do with their development. In addition to that, I look after a team of people who are in our regulatory services. So that's our rangers. We also have staff who do environmental health, and environmental health looks at things like the safety of restaurants, so food safety. We also do commercial pool, water quality compliance, and skin penetrating businesses, so tattoo parlours and hairdressers and body piercers and stuff.
It's got a diverse sort of portfolio there.
Very diverse. And I also look after building certifications, so making sure buildings are safe as well. So that part of our business we look at as keeping our community safe.
And then you explain a little bit, like that's like how much of the environment stuff from your degree would you use in that sort of work? Like how's that integrate?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question. So when I first took on the job with council, when I was interviewed for the position, I actually said to my interview panel, if you're hiring me because you want somebody in, or if you're looking to hire me because you want somebody who has local government experience, then I'm not going to get this job because I don't have it at all. And they weren't looking for that. They were looking for somebody who could actually work with people who had the technical skills to be able to do all those different jobs. My science degree and my environmental science degree that I did really helps me understand how they're communicating to me and what they're telling me about the technical aspect of their job. But it really is a great differential, I suppose, for them and for me, that I'm not trying to get into how they do their job or the technical aspects of how they do their job, because they're very competent in being able to do that themselves.
But my job is background to have those meaningful conversations.
Yeah, that's right. And the other part of my job, that I also do is sustainability. So looking at the future of, massive one. So it's probably, and don't tell my team this, but it's probably the one that gets me, that I get out of bed every day to do my job because I love it, but it's the one that keeps me there, is the sustainability and the whole intergenerational benefits of local government, that keep me in my role.
Yeah. And I think that's a really exciting area because that's where we're seeing more innovation and creativity and all the interdisciplinary work. And I know you've spoken before about working with some research teams at one of the local universities, and that's just really exciting when you start seeing new ideas come forward to solve problems, so that I can understand why that gets you out of bed.
Yeah, definitely.
So is that the thing you most love about your job, or is there something else you'd say you love about it?
Every day in my job is different. So I walk into my office. One of the guys at my work said to me the other day, "Do you write a list every day?" And I said, "No. If I wrote a list every day, I would be disappointed at the end of the day because I don't know what's going to come at me. Yeah, I have meetings scheduled in my calendar and all of that sort of stuff, but every day is different in terms of what my team might need from me and also what I might need to be able to contribute to the organisation. It can be really frustrating sometimes to work with the community as well, but it's also really rewarding because you can see the changes that you're making actually really manifest themselves in our community. And probably the other thing that I really enjoy about my job is that I love the people that I work with. They are very, very, I have a great team of people. There's about 30 of them in my team.
You'll have to show them this video.
Yeah. And but I love the fact that they're all really dedicated and committed people to everything that they do, and so that really helps when you're working in that kind of environment as well. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
What about most challenging parts of your job? Things that, you know, if you had a choice, probably wouldn't get you out of the bed in the morning.
That
might be a bit extreme.
I deal a lot in rules. So a lot of what my team does is around making sure that we're making consistent decisions, and that people are doing, in the compliance space, people are doing what they said they were going to do. And so quite often that can be a real challenge to navigate with the community. We use a lot of language in local government and in science generally that sometimes people don't understand. So
translate that to the public then?
Correct. Yeah. So being able to translate the technical into the practical. So what does it actually mean for the person on the ground? And that can be really real challenge. And so some days I know that we might have some compliance questions that are being asked of us that can be quite challenging. So they're the ones that I generally want to stay in bed for. But for the most part, that's rare. It's rare.
And I guess too, when you've got rules, it's always a bit tricky when you've got each circumstance could have little nuances that could create grey areas where you've got to try and make decisions within the parameters. And I guess that would be a bit of a tough call. And then you could get two situations that are hair's breadth apart that, you know, you're trying to be fair and consistent, but it could be a bit tricky to always keep that. Yeah,
that's right. So when you think about how towns are developed, you know, and particularly, you know, if you've got a community that's been there for a very long time, like Singleton's been there for nearly 200 or over 200 years now, and it's changed and grown and developed, and people have made decisions about how buildings are constructed and what the layout of the town will look like. And that's going to continue to change into the future. So there is a bit of subjectivity when it comes to making those sorts of planning decisions. And so it's a real important focal point for people who work in the sector to really recognise that I'm making decisions today that are going to affect intergenerationally, you know, and they're not going to be things that I may even see realised. So
you're dealing with today's problems, but trying to have a view of things that haven't occurred yet.
Yeah, that's right. Predict what could happen into the future, or predict how people might feel about, or how people might use a space into the future. What does that look like? And that can be a really challenging thing to do. So I'm very conscious of the fact that we carry that as part of our role. Yeah.
And you've worked in a few different areas in environmental science, and so you can see that there are a variety of ways a person could use an environmental science degree. Could you maybe touch on some of the important roles that environmental science degrees can have in society, and maybe what you feel some of your personal favourite contributions have been through your study and your work?
So I think environmental science, when you do environmental science at university, you come out as a generalist. So the ability to actually be able to use the skills that you've gained through study means that you can go on any real trajectory that you might want to, whatever really takes your interest. I've always been interested in the way in which we plan how land is used, and it probably hasn't actually really hit me consciously that that's what I've been interested in until quite recently. But I worked in the mining industry for 20 years, and that's all about how land is used. The rehabilitation of land is all about how land is used. And now that I'm in local government, that's a very primal focus of what it is that I do in my current job. But there's a whole range of different career paths that you could take in environmental science, and particularly now. When I studied environmental science back in the 90s, there were very few people who actually graduated from the environmental science degree through university. Now the opportunities to go into sustainable development and ESG, and looking at the sustainable future, looking at universities, studying, working at universities, doing research into the environment, but also working with non-profit organisations or NGOs, working with United Nations, working with other organisations who are trying to implement the Sustainable Development Goals within their organisations and at that grassroots level. It's really an endless opportunity for people to be able to do that. Yeah.
And I think even though, I think people often hear science and they think, oh, that's not people work, but I think environmental science is very much people work, because I'm thinking of the sectors that you have worked in, and even your background from having connections with agriculture and farming, and a lot of people in that sector, and then you've got mining, and then you've got council and all the other uses that councils would have for land, and some of those will work together and some of them definitely will not. So there's always that, the politics, the negotiations, and how do you find that? Do you enjoy that side of your work? You must, being in council, or are there moments?
Yeah, I find it really interesting. Like I grew up in central Queensland. I grew up in a remote cattle property in central Queensland, and so I learnt a lot in my younger years, probably subconsciously, about the importance of the environment and the connection to land that people have, whether
water conservation too,
that intergenerational connection with land. Yeah. And I think and learning about how to conserve the environment was a really significant part of my formative years. And then when I went into research at the University of Queensland first. And that was really about learning and asking questions about what is happening around me. And I've found throughout my whole career that science has really taught me two things. It's taught me to ask questions and really interrogate the information that's put in front of me and make an informed decision about what I need to do with that information. And that's taken me through right from, my first job that I had at the University of Queensland, right through to the job that I have now. And I quite often tell my staff, I need the information, and I need all of the information in order to be able to make my decision. So if you don't even
you really integrate, you learn how to integrate pieces of information to look at a picture and problem solve
the whole picture. Yeah.
Create.
Yeah.
The exciting thing is actually that's what I think. I'm a very strong believer in science being a very creative discipline, and I think it's got a really bad name for not being creative. Creative people do art. A lot of creative people are in the sciences, and they're the people who are behind a lot of the innovations. So I love that, we see creativity coming out in science, and that integration of ideas and data and decision making and problem solving. I find that really exciting.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, that science is creative and it's collaborative. And I think that's one of the other really beautiful things about what I learnt from university is to not only get the information to challenge myself and my understanding of what's happening around me, but also to seek other opinions around it as well, and collaborate with other people to get that informed decision and get a whole bunch of different views around what's happening. And that happens a lot in my current job. Often we have people who have different views to what we have and to what council has around what they would like to see happen into the future. So it's about collecting all of that information and turning it into something meaningful for them as well. Yeah.
And the other thing too, I think that any of us can take from science is that we make these decisions with information we have at the current time, with the understanding, no matter how great a theory is or our data collection, our problem solving at the time, until something new comes along, we find a new piece of information that blows the old information out of the water, or sends us on a new trajectory. It's all at this point in time. This is the best decision we can make. Or, at this point in time, this is our understanding of the world. And science is not always just factual. We have evidence to support our positions, and that's all about all we can do. But it's always changing, and I think that's also another exciting part of science.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Now, can you tell me a little bit more about how you got where you are? So a bit about your academic pathway, key jobs experiences, any particular people that may have stood out for you as sort of helping you go in a particular direction?
Yep. So I studied, as I said before, I studied a Bachelor of Applied Science, majoring in environmental science at the University of Queensland. So that was a long time ago, unfortunately. So
you did honours after that as well?
I did honours, yeah. So I graduated in 1995 with honours from UQ. And then I started working at the University of Queensland in a research capacity, which I think really helped enormously, I guess, influence the way in which I think about the world. And because research comes with that capacity to be able to ask a lot of questions and take the time to get the information needed to answer it.
Patience, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I think, I think about my career, and I think about the way I interact with people and the questions that I ask, and I've had a lot of people say to me throughout my career, like, why do you think like that? And I think it's my research background, that's been really formative for that. And then
I'm sorry to interject, but I'm just thinking, because I remember observing you going through that process those many years ago. But when you're going through a research project like that, you had to think about design, but design that was valid. So, when kids are doing experiments at school or having to do those horrible assignments where you've got to design an experiment or something like that, these are real world skills that you put into place. Yes. And you might have, and they're reiterative, so you might have to fix something if it doesn't work out the first time and so on. Do you want to talk about your experience of that?
Yeah, so the whole concept of adaptive management. So there's a whole bunch of different, descriptors for what you could call it, but adaptive management is really exactly that. It's about taking the information that's coming into you and analysing that information, understanding that information, and then acting upon that information. And as you quite rightly point out, sometimes that is the best available information at that particular point in time, but it's not leaving it at that. It's actually continuing that loop of collecting the data, analysing the data, informed decisions around it. And I do that every day in my current job. I'm collecting information about a whole range of different things, and particularly the services that we provide to our community. And it's not because we want to hit anybody with a wacky stick over it. It's to help us better understand how we can improve the level of service that we provide. And I've been doing that for my entire career. It's about that adaptive management loop.
And you're always future thinking too. I know I think all the roles you've had, you're always thinking down the track to impacts who, what, and how that
how they're impacted, what can we do to minimise that impact as much as possible. And that's very much a lot of the work that I did when I was in the mining, when I was in the mining industry. I had a whole range of different jobs in industry, but towards the back end of my career in industry, I was in that sort of corporate space looking at getting new project approvals. And so that was really about that long-term, not just about what they wanted now, but how we're going to make sure what we do now doesn't have those long-term consequences for the community into the future. And that can be quite a challenging thing to think about, because it's really hard to predict where you're going to be in 20 or 40 years' time. But that, in my current job, that's what we do every day. We predict.
So it sounds like the skills from the science degree actually naturally lend themselves to the management sorts of roles.
Yeah. I also went back to uni because I'm a bit of a glutton for punishment in that respect. But I went back to uni and studied a Masters of Environmental Science, so which I did through ANU out of Canberra. Took me quite a long time to get that qualification because I was working.
When you're working full time and
full-time at the same time. But what that also taught me to do was really, really hone those analytical skills, because the law is all about analysis as well. It's about taking information, analysing it and forming an opinion on that. And that's what judges do. And
I think that's important because a lot of people don't realise law is actually quite a big part of environmental science. It's policies and all that. They probably don't think some people might not think about that, but yeah.
That's right. So a lot of the planning that happens around how land is used is legal planning, and there's a lot of, particularly here in New South Wales, there's a lot of case law precedents around how land is used, and it can be quite a litigious sort of space to play in. So, so it is really, I saw it at the time when I was working in the mining industry. I did my master's, and I saw it as an opportunity to help me better understand some of the principles around planning. And it was a really helpful degree as well, because it covered a whole bunch of different environmental impacts. So I went from the international environmental law. It included the law of water management in Australia, which is quite a complex space to operate in as well. So the environmental science component of it gave me the technical skills, and the law side of it helped me understand why the rules were the way that they were. So those two things combined really helped me, I think, get a better understanding of how to apply my scientific background in the real world. And then,
were there specializations within that degree beyond the science and law stuff? Was there another specialization or path that you could take or did take in that? Or was it that refining your existing skills into more specialist environmental skills and the policies and management type things?
When I graduated from the University of Queensland, I specialised in ecology. And I did a lot of ecology work in my when I was working at the University of Queensland in my research capacity. It was all about rehabilitation of mined land, and that was very ecologically focused. When I moved into the mining industry itself, there were components of it that were ecology based, because we were still doing work around mining rehabilitation, but a lot of it moved more towards the legal and practical and the broader issues that come with mining around, water quality, amenity, air quality, those sorts of things. And it's probably now, in my current role where those sorts of things are becoming more evident. And I think too, like the way in which that diversity of specialization, I guess, like you can choose, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure, really. And there were other streams that you could go down. I chose ecology, and I specialised in botany because trees don't move. And I found that was quite a good thing for me, is that like I didn't have to run around after animals. Trees don't move and they don't play at night time. So I could do all of my botanical studies.
Losing his sleep over it.
Yeah, I wasn't losing sleep over it.
And I remember you had a fairly strong background in soil science, which we had a few laughs about, but there was with those people serious about soil versus dirt. But I had actually learned a little bit through you about the complexity of soil composition, which, can have a massive impact on a range of things ecologically. So, yeah, I mean, I imagine that sort of feeds into all of that ecology stuff as well. So you've got background of other things you haven't even mentioned that would sit behind all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like all of those different subjects that you learn when you go to university help you form the view that you have about what's happening in the world around you. So, ecology is the whole ecosystem. It's everything. And ecology includes the plants, the trees, the air, the animals, everything. Yeah, the soil, the water, everything that contributes to creating that environment. And you can take that anywhere throughout your entire career, because as much as, even my son, who's 11, he talks about the environment. He's learning about the environment at school. So, it starts at a very young age, the learning around all of these different concepts. Whereas for me, it started when I was at university, the formalised learning around it, because you didn't learn about this sort of stuff at school. So
I know things have thankfully changed.
Heaps. So understanding the environment that we live, work and play in is a critical part to us as being human beings today.
For sure.
Yeah.
now. One of the things I'm really interested in with women in STEM is the personal characteristics that people have. Now, there's always some kind of tenacity to get someone through a degree, but some people might not do a degree and they end up in STEM careers in one way or another. And there are still those personal characteristics that come through. The other thing is that you did spend some time working in very heavily male-dominated areas. So, you know, as a female, I know you sort of mentioned a little bit about your particular views of how it was to work in those spaces. And do you want to expand a little bit about that? What was your experience of that? What are your personal characteristics you think that have along the way with the different things that have occurred in your pathway? What sort of personal traits do you think have gotten you where you are today?
I think working in a heavily male-dominated industry, and not all sciences are male-dominated, but
No.
working in a heavily male-dominated industry requires you to develop resilience, just as it would if you were working in a heavily female-orientated industry. I think you need to learn resilience and how to be able to navigate the different types of personalities that come with, a dominant workplace. I think the other thing too that is an important personal characteristic is persistence. So if at first you don't succeed, then try again and keep trying. And because I've found that one of the biggest ways to instigate change is to do all of the things that we just talked about, get the information that you need to be able to help make the informed decision, put that in a way that people can understand. So take the technical jargon and convert it into language that most people would be able to understand, and then present your case. And if the first time it doesn't work, then you go back and reanalyze and look at how you could change the way in which you presented your case to achieve the outcome that you're looking for. And I've found that
I think I'm hearing here also within that is patience
yes.
and good communication skills too.
Yes. I think one of the questions that you had on the question sheet, Kerry, was, what subjects at school were the most valuable for you? And you're probably going to hate me for saying this, but English is the most valuable.
That is not the first time someone has said that, so you're not the only one who's saying that one. Sorry, my
English is the most valuable subject that you will ever take away from school because you need it to do everything else. You can't read without English, you can't write without English, you can't communicate without English. So, learning a language is critically important, and being able to communicate that language in a way that people can understand is phenomenally important, particularly in roles that are technical, when you're trying to explain something that is not somebody's normal state of conversation. So engineers don't think like ecologists, so you've got to find a way to speak their language.
Actually, I'm doing some research on interdisciplinary work at the moment. Language differences is one of the first things that comes up, not necessarily as an irremovable obstacle, but as certainly something that needs to be addressed. Language includes people and it connects people, so that's the first thing that needs to be addressed usually.
Yeah, and a lot of people I found over my career, particularly in mining over my career, because environmental science and the environmental side of mining is such a technical area. You have to find ways to be able to communicate that in a way that people can understand. And coming back full circle to that adaptive management framework, it's about taking the information that's available to you, analysing that information and presenting it to people with options about what can be done with that information, to then give people the extent of information that's necessary for them to make that decision. And quite often by doing that, you can take them on the pathway that they need to be taken on to achieve the outcomes that you're looking for. I think that's a really, really important continuation of that loop is critically important. And if it doesn't work, I have a mantra with my team at the moment where, there's no bad idea. there's just ideas that didn't work. So all you have to do is go and, well, that idea didn't work. Okay, well, let's go and try something different. We know that's not going to work. So we
sometimes
modify.
it's an idea that's just at the wrong time in the wrong place, but it can be rejigged some other time. So that can happen too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or it's an idea that grows into something else when you bounce. I love it when you get a team of people and you start bouncing ideas and then it grows and everyone goes, hey, sort of grows into something amazing.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned English being important. You did science and maths. What were your other subjects you did at school?
I did the standard maths, chemistry, physics. Probably the biggest regret of my life is not having done biology at high school.
Me too. Because I love it.
Yes, and it was the field that I went into was a biological field, and I did not study it at high school. I also studied accounting, which much to probably my current employer's disgust, I haven't really retained much of my basic accounting.
But I imagine that actually could be useful when you're talking about a management role. Yeah.
Yes, understanding budgets, understanding the positive and negative side of a ledger is really important. And I have some basic recollection of that from my accounting days, but it's not something that I was particularly excited about when I was at school. So it wasn't something that I continued to pursue.
And I think if we don't think something's important, our brain often files it in the we'll never need again file, and we delete it. But if you are one of those people who's studying accounting at school, remember that it could come in handy later. So hold on to it.
Yes, I wish I had held on to some of my basic accounting.
And I always wish I'd done business studies. That one major area that I have a massive deficit. I got no clue.
Yeah, but you also have to remember when I studied accounting, it was all by hand. So you had these I can't even remember what they were called, but it was
pre-internet era.
Yeah.
Some people probably can't even think of such a world, but
can't even imagine what that would be like. Yeah. So I've carried that throughout my career. Like Excel is not my friend. So, there's a whole bunch of things that I've had to come to terms with that I'm not very good at. So it's also really important as you work through your career to recognize the things that you're not really good at, and surround yourself with the people who are good at that, and rely and, use their knowledge to help you better understand what's happening in your space.
I think that's an important point too, because there are two ways you can go. One is if it's something you really need for your job, spend the time developing it. But sometimes you can't be a master of everything.
No.
So tap into the other people and resources around you.
Yeah, that's exactly
something you hate, someone else might love doing. So win-win.
Yeah. So you might have a job ad in your future that says, that there's 10 things on it that you've got to be, that they want to see as the skills necessary to be able to do the job. And accounting might be the one thing on that list that I can't do. It won't necessarily deter me from applying for that job. It just means when I go through that interview process, I'm going to be really honest about the fact that, look, if you're looking for an accountant, it's not going to be me because I'm not very, very good in that space, but I have all of the skills that you need for these other parts of the role. And I think that's a really important thing is in employers, they look for what you understand as being your weaknesses just as much as selling your strengths. Yeah.
And I think the openness to learning, if it's really required for a role, that's one thing I've heard coming through again and again is that, okay, if you want me to learn this, okay, go your hardest, teach me what you want me to know, or taking opportunities if they're coming up, even if you are very, very scared and don't really believe that it's the right role for you, what we call imposter syndrome. Everyone suffers at some point. Just say yes and, see what happens.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And that constant desire to learn is really important. It's important for mental health and well-being. It's important for future growth and development. It's important for employment opportunities further down the track. Being able to demonstrate that you have a willingness to learn new skills, even though you may not have them right now, is critically important. So, yes, one day I will learn accounting again.
Hey, look, if someone else wants to do it for you,
I get a lot of help.
I'd spend my time learning some other skills personally, like knitting, or I don't know. Now, were there any are there any key mentors or people that have kind of said, hey, I really think you'd be good at this or that along the way, that have kind of made a sort of a helped you kind of go in a particular direction at all?
I've had some really helpful, like I've over the years, I've gotten some really helpful mentoring. I've had coaching as well, which has been really helpful. And I think I've tended to really gravitate, I suppose, towards people who challenge me in the way that I think about where I would like to go and what I would like to do. Some of the people, like in my in my early years, like my grandfather was a very strong influence over my understanding of the environment when I was a lot younger. Sorry, my I need to get a drink of water, Kerry. Sorry.
No, you go ahead. I'll just pause.
Yeah, so my grandfather was very important for me in my early years, and my father was as well. My father was probably the one who taught me to question everything from a very early age, and it led me to where I'm going, where I have been going, I suppose, in my career. But also along the way, the director of the centre that I worked at the University of Queensland was also very supportive of me and has been very supportive of me throughout my career. And I also have a person who, in my previous role, became a very important sounding board, I suppose, for the sorts of things that I wanted to do with my career as well. And that's really helped me, I guess, understand where I want to go. It was really hard for me to make the decision to leave the mining industry. I was very comfortable where I was, and it's quite frightening to step from a career that you've been in for a very long time into one that you know nothing about. Can be quite a frightening, challenging thing to do.
Going from a place of expertise, aren't you, to one where you need
I had
to
no expertise in local government. I didn't even know half of the jobs that I was managing even existed before I started in local government. So that was a really, really challenging period for me. But I had a lot of support through that. And the director who employed me at the time was also incredibly supportive of the fact that he didn't want a technical expert. He wanted somebody who was going to take the team where they needed to go in terms of their technical skills. So just before I started my job in local government, I went off and did a graduate certificate in organisational leadership to help me understand what kind of people leader I actually wanted to be. And, recognise that there are a whole bunch of different types of leadership out there, and to really think about all of the experiences that I've had with leaders in the past, good and bad, because you're going to be managed by bad people as well as good people. And what are the good bits that I wanted to take from that, and what are the bad bits that I wanted to learn from it. And that was really important for me in this role, because there were a lot of things that I've had in the past in terms of management experience on me that I did not want to put on my team. The pressure, the micromanagement. I think, a lot of people have been in that in their careers, and those things are not things that necessarily make a good people leader. So I've had pretty much through every job that I've had throughout my career, I've had people who have helped support me along the way. And I've also had people who I've gone, you know what, like that's not really for me. The value set that exists there doesn't necessarily gel with mine. So, I think it's time for me to move on to my next career decision.
Yeah, I think values, that's an important thing that you've raised there, that your value system is something you do need to think about, be conscious of. That may direct firstly what initial degree you do, and what's important to you. And then the second thing, mentioning that you did a grad cert because that was another skill set that you wanted to add to your portfolio, I suppose. I'm a big believer in, once you've got that first degree, that's your biggest one, I think, getting that first degree out of the way. And then it becomes a lot easier to spend fewer years adding little sections of education on top of that to specialize. So you had the masters where you deepened your understanding of your expertise area, and probably set you up well for the management role and government and policy. And then you've got the organisational leadership as well. And some people will then go on to do things like an MBA, a Master of Business Administration, that accounting. But the look at other skill sets that they want to just refine or specialise for a particular role. And your values and interests change as you go through your career as well, and as you experience life too. Have you had that experience? Is there anything that's kind of made you think, oh, maybe I would like to go down another particular direction at some point in the future?
In the future, wow. I haven't really thought too much about that. Probably because I still think I have so much left to contribute in my current role. And I can still, one of the things that I really love about my current role as well is that I still have engagement with the mining industry, because Singleton is quite a large mining community. So whilst we don't regulate mining at a local government level, we still have the ability to influence government around the way in which mining is undertaken. So I find that really, really still challenging and mentally stimulating for me. And I think
I brought that background with you. It's still influencing your current role. Even though you thought you were completely changing your sector, you actually are using it.
Yes, absolutely. And would I have applied for a position in local government if it wasn't in a mining community? Probably not, But at the time as well, I was transitioning. I'd made a clear decision in my mind that I wanted to leave the industry. And so I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I had the benefit, I suppose, of being able to take some time to actually make that decision between my previous job and the applying for the job that I got with council. I had time to reflect and think about what I actually wanted to do, and that's when I signed up to do the organisational leadership graduate certificate, because people leadership was something that I really wanted to get into.
And was there anything that? Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right. Yep.
I was just going to ask if there was if there were any particular triggers, or was it just a where you were at type of thing that made you consider changing directions from the mining sector? To be honest, I think I was tired, and I really did need to have a change. The mining sector is a 24/7 business. I had a young child at the time, and I was away from home a lot, and that was starting to affect him. That was starting to affect Andrew. And one of the things that he said to me, he was a 4-year-old at the time, I think, and he said two things to me. The first thing that he said to me was, "Mummy, I'm not happy if you're not happy." And so he clearly sensed that I wasn't happy in what I was doing. And that was a massive wake-up call for me, that I needed to start thinking about doing something different, because I wasn't happy. And when I think back to the back end of that, I wasn't happy in that role. So I made that decision off the back of him really prompting me to really make that change. And I've not looked back. I've been very happy doing what I'm doing now, because as you quite rightly point out, Kerry, it's brought everything in my science learning along for that journey. It's brought everything in my career along for that journey. And I'm not quite sure what the next thing would be or where that would take me to. So you're still building where you are at the moment. You're content to continue developing, because you still learn, don't you? Even though you're an experienced, environmental scientist, you're still building connections, learning, all those sorts of things, which is, I think, one of the exciting things about getting into any profession.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And whilst ever it's making you happy, then, I say that to my team all the time as well. If you're not happy, then what are you doing? You don't get another, jog around the dance floor. It's one shot. So if you're not happy, then you've got to figure out what it is that's going to make you happy. So, and go off and do that. And if that means you've got to go and do that somewhere else, then that's perfectly fine. And I would support that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's always a big thing, as you pointed out, to move from one type of job to another, but it does take courage. But sometimes you feel in yourself that it's right, or it's your values, whether it's family reasons. And I know women often leave the mining sector for family reasons, amongst other things. But it's not. We have to go with what suits our whole life, not just part of our lives.
And I think too, the mining industry, it can be sold as being quite glamorous, but it does happen in some of the remotest parts of the world. And it doesn't happen in inner city Sydney, for example. It happens. So there's a lot of things that as a woman you might need in a community that may not necessarily exist there. So that could be health services, that could be family support, that could be things around childcare. Even can be quite a difficult thing to find in remote communities, and so that they are very difficult things to make decisions around, whether it's your career or your family, and how you work within your own mind about how you're going to deal with all of that is really important. Yeah.
And you would have worked with other women in the industry, and over the long period of time you're working in the mining sector, you would have seen some of those women leave the industry well before you did. Other than what you've already mentioned, are there other reasons you think that women have left that particular sector? Do you know any other environmental scientists as well who've left the sector for, and what reasons do you think?
I think there's a growing the environmental science side of mining is a really challenging side to recruit into now, because there's such a lot of community, a much higher level of community understanding about the impacts and consequences of mining on the environment, both now and into the future. And there's a lot of hard questions that are being asked about, well, what should be left behind as a legacy for future generations. There's a lot of government conversation around that at state and federal levels here in New South Wales in particular. And I think, that can be a really challenging space to put yourself into, because it has such a high profile now. When I was doing it 20 years ago, it didn't have the profile that it has now, and it was a lot.
That wasn't really talked about, was it?
No. The intergenerational sustainability of mining was not something that people had at the front of their mind, whereas now it is quite a difficult concept for anybody to get their head around at the moment. So I think that's a real challenge. It's a huge elephant to try and eat. I think some of the other things that you touched on, Kerry, around family commitments in remote environments is really difficult as well. And making those decisions as a woman can be heartbreaking decisions to make. But I think too, there are the other issue, I think, with women leaving the industry is also about the ability to progress. So environmental science in mining is a very bespoke sort of field. So there's only so far you can go before, I guess, you hit that glass ceiling. And so senior management roles are very difficult to come by. But my recommendation would be that when they do, put your hand up, because they won't know unless you put your hand up that you're even interested.
Are those roles typically going to engineers, or what sorts of professions are typically represented in those management roles?
I think a lot of them, sometimes they're represented by engineers, surveyors, environmental scientists do sort of sit around the table, I suppose. My experience before I left the industry was that the majority of those senior roles were held by men, that there weren't a lot of women sitting at the table. But I think it's really important to put yourself out there as somebody who is competent and capable of being able to sit around the table and have those conversations and make that contribution.
And like what you're saying before about don't fail to put your hand up just because you don't tick every single box, because often they're not looking for every single box. They're just looking for the most boxes, or those boxes and a certain something about whoever they're interviewing. And with you, because you're in the industry for quite a while, over that period of time, did you notice an increase of women in the mining sector generally?
Good question. So yes and no. I think it depended on where I was. So when I was working in Central Queensland, the team that I worked in had 4 women, and that was really good.
Out of how many?
Out of five environmental staff, there were 4.
Oh, okay,
yeah. Sorry, yeah. No, the whole mining operation, I think, had a few more than that.
I was going to say.
I hope they had a few more than that.
Oh, when you said 5, I was going to go 5,000. So
when I first moved down to New South Wales to work in the industry, I was the 3rd woman to be employed at the mining operation and the 1st woman in a technical capacity. So that was really interesting. It was a fabulous learning experience for me in terms of it was an underground mining operation, and going underground is very different to working in an open cut mine. So I found that the inclusiveness that I had when I was working at that operation was fabulous. And so, you know, in that capacity, I think it was only a small mining operation. So there was only me, and then I think there was maybe 2 or 3 other women that were employed during my time there as well, but mostly in administrative sort of roles. And then when I moved into the corporate sector, there was definitely an increase in the number of women that were employed in the environmental science field, and it was probably more a 50-50 kind of split at the operational level for environmental scientists. So it was
location dependent.
Very much location dependent. Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
And the types of roles, obviously, that you're around.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And what's on offer. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you have seen women out there, because I know someone was saying that even just seeing other women made them feel just that little bit more comfortable. You know, it's that like whole you're not alone type of thing. And I don't know what it is. It's not that you're more or less safe or anything like that, but there's something that we can't put our fingers on, that just someone who's a little bit more like us, perhaps, even if it's just gender alone. Maybe somehow that makes us feel more like, oh yeah, I belong. I'm not an outcast, because I'm not part of the majority.
Yeah, I'm not an imposter. You know, I'm somebody. I am actually somebody who's capable and competent of doing the job that I'm here to do. I just happen to be a different gender. Yeah.
And with the future of environmental science, from your perspective, what your experience is, do you see any major changes with policy or the way environmental science is used in Australia? Do you see that on the horizon, or do you think it's a gradual shift that we'll see?
Yeah, I think the desire of the community to hold government and businesses to account for their environmental impact is only going to increase. You know, I see what my son is learning at school, and the questions that he's asking are fabulous questions that, you know, where people of my generation and the generations in between my generation and my son, you know, really do need to start listening to those questions that are being asked about how we're planning for the use of the environment that we have now, and what are we actually going to leave behind for those future generations. I think, you know, the opportunities to be able to influence and change the way in which we think about our sustainable footprint is you know, phenomenal at this particular point in time, and the capacity to generate change now is so much greater than what it was when I first started in industry.
Yeah, it's much bigger profile, isn't it?
Much bigger profile.
Any particular area, like water is obviously big in Australia, but we've got soil quality because of salination and particularly the food bowls. There's land clearing. Are there any, and there's obviously land mine rehabilitation. Are there any particular niche areas within any of the strands that you know of that you think deserve particular attention more than the others, or think might get it for some reason?
I think things that have the capacity to, I guess, impact our ability to be resilient to climate change. So things like flooding and the impacts of flooding, soil erosion, biodiversity has a massive impact on flooding and flooding capability. And even water take from the environment and how water is managed in the environment has a significant impact on flooding and future flooding impacts. Bushfire
surfaces produced by councils, all that kind of stuff impacts water runoff. And
yep, that is correct. Yeah. So, and then things like bushfire and the biodiversity consequences of major bushfires and what impact that can have on the future viability of the environment, as well as... I think
I've seen a bigger push on bushfire management, and that's even living in North Queensland, and we've obviously most of them have been further down towards where you are, but it's such a massive thing that we're seeing with environmental change, aren't we? And it affects people's livelihoods and lives and infrastructure and biodiversity and it's got a massive impact with the areas we see damaged.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those types of disciplines where there is the potential for, climate change to significantly affect the way in which the environment looks is really going to be important, and how we adapt to that and be more resilient towards that is going to be a community problem that we'll need to resolve sooner probably rather than later. So things like disaster readiness, how prepared are people for a disaster, what does a disaster look like, as well as how do you design the infrastructure to be resilient to climate change. And climate change is a language that engineers are not familiar with. So how do you bring the language of climate change into the day-to-day? How do you bring the science that underpins climate change into day-to-day decision-making? I think environmental science has a role to play in all of those things. And part of me wishes I was 18 years old again now, so I could go on that journey and experience.
Yeah, gosh. And as you're speaking, I'm even thinking of, with all the flooding that's occurred, not just in Australia, but overseas as well, and things like riverbanks that have needed reinforcement and erosion proof through either, plants or through infrastructure. That's engineer type stuff coupled with environmental science work and definitely that teamwork to try and problem solve. But there's a great capacity for problem solving, I think, there in an exciting way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I really need to ask you. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your profession that you think is important, or the way you can get to any particular profession in environmental science? Any tips you'd give?
Probably the only tip that I would give is to study biology. That's cool.
I mean, you can survive without it, but why would you?
It hurts to survive without it, but it is possible. I think Kerry and I are examples of how it is possible to survive without it. But I think
you've got to learn the language a lot faster when you get to uni. It is another language, so if you learn it at school a little bit more slowly, it's far less stressful.
It's much less stressful.
It's a great subject.
Much less stressful. I think the other key message is, being a woman in science. Is really that message around persistence and resilience, and to not be afraid to only hit, 9 out of 10 of those things, and really put your hand up to say, I know I can do this. I might not have all of the skills to do it today, but I have the attitude to get to the point where I can do those things. And that goes an enormous way to being able to have those inroads and use the skills that you have to have that career development that you're looking for sure. Yeah.
And so I'm just remembering a word you used early before we started recording, and I thought that was great because we do often notice when people of the same gender are in our workplace or not in our workplace, as the case may be. But you mentioned that when you're working in the mining sector, and I don't know if you felt like this at the start or whether it kind of just became like this, but you mentioned kind of just seeing people as a bit androgynous. Yeah. And maybe that's why it didn't faze you to be there for so long as one of few women. Do you want to talk around that a little?
Yeah, I mean, I think I never really thought of myself as being different in terms, because I always considered, probably somewhat naively maybe, that I was always going to be recruited on my merit. And so I was on an equitable playing field. That's not the case. There is a massive gender pay divide in the mining industry. And it probably wasn't until the back end of my career that really became quite evident to me, that my merit was really, really good, but I wasn't worth paying, So that can be a real turn off for people, particularly women in the industry as well. But I never looked at myself as being particularly female, or anybody that I was working with being particularly male.
It wasn't about the gender or anything like that.
No, to me it wasn't. It may have been like that for other people that I worked with, but for me personally, I didn't feel like that.
I think that helped you kind of survive, where some people might have been really conscious of that, but for you it wasn't an issue.
Yes. Some people may have taken some of the interactions more personally, perhaps, than what I did. Don't get me wrong, I had not necessarily, when I was in the mining industry, when I worked in research, I had some interesting interactions with people on sites that I worked at, where I did feel incredibly female at the time. But I think I took those learnings as being, okay, well, I'm not going to let that affect me, because maybe that wasn't actually about me as a person or who I am. It was more about the fact that I was a woman. And I think that drove me to thinking even less about that gender divide when I did continue to work in the industry. But yes, there is, and I think that is something that a lot of businesses are working very hard to overcome, is that whole gender pay gap and that whole gender divide, but we still have a long way to go. I will plug local government that there is, at least where I work, there's no gender pay gap. So
yeah, and that's fantastic. I think one of the problems that women tend to encounter, and this is often by choice, but it impacts pay and retirement superannuation, and women take time off to raise children often more frequently than men do. And whether or not that's a choice or whether it's something that women feel they have to do, I'm not sure. But if I could have taken more time off work to be with my kids, I certainly would have. But then finances, we've got to eat. So, everyone's circumstances are going to be different there, and there could be different motivations for different people. And I have heard of women who have had partners at home who are quite happy to be the stay-at-home dad while a woman goes back out to work at a mine site or somewhere else. So, it's I think everyone has to make their own decisions, but on the grander scale, I think we do see more women taking time off work. Therefore, they go in at a lower level compared to their males who've stayed in the industry and gone ahead and been promoted during that time, and they're on higher wages for the same, even though they might have graduated at the same time and things like that. And I don't know that there's an easy solution for that.
No, I think there are things you can do, though. I think putting your hand up to say, while I'm on maternity leave, I want to also stay in touch. I want to have a process in place where I am able to tap back into the workplace, or tap back into training, or tap back into, other components of work, meetings, whatever it might be, so that when you do come back off maternity leave, it's not such a huge, a huge divide between when you left and when you came back. And again, it's something to be persistent about. If your workplace doesn't provide that, then I think that is something that you should advocate for, because keeping in touch is so important. For when you do go off on leave, even if it's extended long service leave, keeping in touch is really important, is an important thing to do. And I did that when I went on maternity leave. I made it, my employer was very open to working with me around what keeping in touch looked like for me. And where I work now is very much has that formalised process around women who go on maternity leave to have those keeping in touch moments. And I think we have 20 days available for when you can keep in touch with the workplace. So that could be training, that could be coming into work. If you're a professional and you are required to maintain professional accreditation, it could be to help support you in your CPD points and all of that sort of stuff. So,
fantastic, yeah. I think that's going to be a tricky thing for some, where you just want to switch off and be with your baby or whatever. But then at the same time, if you're conscious that that could create a problem work-wise, and you value both your career and your family life, and you're trying to balance those, there should be those ways to maintain both sets of values and continue building those without losing time.
I agree. I do say to the women that I work with who are pregnant and wanting to take maternity leave, I say you've always got to give yourself the 3 months to, before, I don't want to hear from you for 3 months, because you need to get to know your baby needs to get to know you. And
catch
after
up
3 months, catch up sleep. And you have an idea, as you know, when you're a first-time mum, you have this idea in your head about what it's going to be like. It's never like what you thought it was going to be like. So you've got to be prepared for that as well. But at the same time, that conversation around, not being able to have both is a conversation that we need to stop having, and we need to find the way that works for you as a mum, to enable you to continue your career, because women in the workforce are incredibly productive and a necessary part of our society. So
definitely for problem solving, that's come out again and again. And I know I don't want to put words in your mouth at all, but I do know that one person was saying that some women have had, not necessarily intentional, but they've had a bit of guilt put on them. Like, why don't you miss your baby? Or, oh, isn't it hard being away from them from a week at a time when they're so small? And those sorts of comments that can make a woman who may already be teetering on the brink of, I really value my job, but I really value my time with my family. And they might be spending 24/7 with their kid for a week at home when they're at home. But because they're spending some time away, even if they've got a supportive partner at home who's doing their heavy lifting while they're at work, they may be getting those little just needles in conversation, unintentional as they may be, that sort of just make them doubt themselves as to whether they're doing the right thing by their children. And there's nothing worse than mother guilt. Very, very powerful stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that conversation needs to cease as well, because it's unhelpful. Everybody makes decisions, and nobody asks a man whether or not they should be at home with their baby.
I haven't heard of any being asked. I mean, I don't know if it may happen. I don't know, but
I've never heard of anybody. Nobody's ever asked my husband why he's not home with his son, and he is a parent just like I am a parent. But I have had that question asked of me. He's never had that question asked of him. So I think, that whole idea that women are the primary caregivers. Yes, in most cases that is the case, but we don't need to be reminded of that on a daily basis.
And so some people are single parents, and that may be that the kids stay with either their ex-partner during that week off. So I know some families, and that just works for them, but they still may get asked that question if someone doesn't understand their circumstances.
Yeah.
And I realise that some people watching this may not be thinking about children. If you're 16 or 17 and you think, I haven't thought about kids or anything, when you go into your career, eventually at some point, it may become something that you need to consider. Might not be in the next few years, but it's something to consider when you go into a career, to be willing to have those conversations and to be planning ahead about how you're going to get an equitable situation with others in your industry.
Yeah, and I think be brave about those conversations, you know, and don't be afraid to have them, because you don't know if you don't ask. It's how you ask that's really important. It's not what you're asking that matters. And I think most employers will hopefully consider whatever request is being made of them about the way in which you want to contribute to the workplace. And I think everybody has that contribution to make. But you're right, Kerry, it is a decision that you will have to make, because at some point, if you want to have a family, that's what it involves. There's no getting around that. So I think thinking about what that looks like for you and your career development as early as possible will help you be able to plan and have those conversations as you go through your career.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Any last comments or words on? I know we've had a pretty long conversation tonight, but
no, I did write some notes.
Very fruitful, I think.
Yeah, no, it was really good. It was really good. Yeah, it's nice to be able to reflect on where I've come from to be where I am today, I guess, because it's not something that you often look back on is, well, you know, how did I get to where I am? And the questions that you sent to me earlier on, Kerry, were fabulous to help me think about. And there were some of them were quite hard. Some of the questions that, particularly from the teenagers, were quite hard questions. Oh, gee, you know.
Yeah, we came up with some questions, and I asked my kids, and, you know, of course, they're on social media with their friends, and I said, ask everybody, what are the questions you have? If you're at this event, what sort of questions do you want to ask people?
What sort of questions do you want to ask?
And one of them that I haven't asked you, and obviously when you're a teenager, the idea that you're going to go out into a profession and earn the big bucks, very, very enticing. And I have to say, if you're going to go and work, you want to get paid. Show me the money. Absolutely. What sorts of jobs do you think would be the top paying jobs in environmental science? Would they be ones that have ended up in management and some capacity in project management and things like that?
Yeah, definitely like a senior executive role, like a corporate senior executive role is going to be the highest paying role available to an environmental science person. So that depend, you know, that could be specifically in an ESG kind of field, or it could be.
So what's ESG?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that question.
Is it like the energy? No?
I think it means environment and social governance. Like it's like
That'll do.
Corporate sustainable governance.
Look it up, people. Look it up.
Look it up. ESG. It's the buzz acronym of the century.
And would these top paying jobs be mostly in the energy sector, like oil, gas, coal?
Mostly in mining. You know, energy is a huge. We didn't even talk about energy, but energy is a huge opportunity for environmental science as well. Renewable energy,
hydro electricity is getting bigger. Wind farming is getting bigger.
Wind farming, solar. You know, there's a whole bunch. There's a whole transition to sort of a renewable energy space. Even car manufacturing and the way in which cars are now being manufactured to be electric, you know, the environment, the whole sustainability footprint of all of those sorts of technologies is going to be an increasing one. So any of those industries will have somebody in a senior executive position that's paid well for the advice that they give.
And so to get to those roles, you do your basic science degree, and then you do that layering of things like management, your organisational leadership, maybe some accounting.
Probably. I would recommend doing some accounting.
Master of Business Administration, project management, those sorts of layered sort of extra what we call postgraduate qualifications, which are those qualifications that are done after your first degree.
Correct. Yes.
So the world is your oyster if you want to continue learning.
Yes. Technical skills will take you so far. You need to get people skills to take on that journey as well. So how to work with people, how to manage people, and how to communicate to people are really, and understanding the ways in which people communicate with us is a really important skill set to take on your journey. So I left that to quite late in my career. I would highly recommend that if you can do that in parallel, get those people skills as you're working through your technical skills as well. So you can take both of them along on your journey.
And yet I do recall, and this is probably just purely from observation, but even though, you might have felt like you're doing your own thing while you're at uni, you still collaborated with a lot of other fellow environmental scientists, students who were studying the same thing. So all of that stuff is still people skill building. It's not like you didn't have those skills or anything. They were you just use them as part of your social networking. So even your social life can positively impact your ability to work with lots of different types of people and talk. And
absolutely. And sometimes when you're asked in an interview, like you might be asked in an interview questions about your capacity to communicate with other people, you don't just have to necessarily give work examples of that. You can give examples of what you did, a project that you worked on at university, and how you were able to communicate that, or even a difficult, challenging situation that you might have had in your personal life. So those things are all things that contribute to your ability to interact with other people. And the further you develop in your career, the more important those people skills will become. So recognizing that you have them early on and that you're gaining them is a really important thing to contribute to your interviewing conversations. Yeah,
because there are things we can do to train ourselves and refine our skills, aren't they? Be more aware of the way we're coming across, or what other people's intentions are and how we respond to that. So there's always more we can learn.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I'm sure I had another question for you, but we've probably talked for quite a long time already. Any last words?
No, just thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to talk about this. I think, Women in STEM is and the whole project that you're working on, Kerry, I think is profoundly groundbreaking and will change people's lives. So,
Well, it's really, I'm grateful to you. I'm just thankful for all you and all the other women who've given up their precious time to share your stories, really, because I think the whole idea is that you're revealing the pathways that are otherwise invisible to young people coming out of school. No one knows what a job is like until they get there, and to hear those insider information, it's really hard often to connect with people already in a profession, unless someone's in your family already who's in that job. So these are opportunities that I think that you're giving to young people. So thank you so much for the time that you've donated to this project. It's really
no worries. No worries at all.
Okay.